On May 8, 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over, and nearly 1 million men who had worn the uniform of the Waffen SS woke up to a terrifying new reality. Yesterday, they were elite soldiers. Today, they were criminals. The SS had been declared a criminal organization. Every member faced automatic arrest. Every member faced investigation. Every member could be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. The lightning bolt tattoo under their left arm, once a mark of pride, was now a mark of guilt. What do you do when your entire organization becomes illegal overnight? What do you do when your uniform becomes evidence? What do you do when simply existing makes you a wanted man? The Waffen SS veterans answered these questions in different ways. Some surrendered and faced justice. Some killed themselves rather than be captured. But most of them did something else entirely. They disappeared. They burned their uniforms. They scraped off their tattoos. They invented new identities. They scattered across the globe. And most of them got away with it. This is the story of the Great Escape. How hundreds of thousands of men who had served one of history's most brutal organizations managed to vanish into the post-war world. Where they went. How they survived. And why so few of them ever faced punishment for what they had done. To understand this story, you need to understand what the Waffen SS was. It was not the same thing as the regular SS, though both wore similar uniforms and answered to the same leader, Heinrich Himmler. The regular SS ran the concentration camps. They organized the Holocaust. They were the administrators of genocide. The Waffen SS was supposed to be different. They were combat soldiers, military units that fought alongside the regular German army on every front. By 1945, the Waffen SS had grown enormous, nearly 40 divisions, almost 900,000 men. They came from Germany, of course, but also from all over Europe. There were Dutch SS divisions, Belgian SS divisions, French, Danish, Norwegian, Ukrainian, Latvian, Estonian. Hitler's war attracted volunteers and conscripts from across the continent. These men fought hard. They earned a reputation for ferocity and determination. They rarely surrendered. They often fought to the last man. Allied soldiers learned to fear the SS insignia. But they also committed atrocities. Waffen SS units massacred prisoners. They murdered civilians. They burned villages. They worked alongside the death squads that killed millions in Eastern Europe. The line between combat soldier and war criminal was blurred beyond recognition. When the war ended, every one of these men was in danger. The question was, what would they do about it? The first challenge was simply surviving the end of the war. In the final weeks, as Germany collapsed, Waffen SS units fought desperately to move westward. They wanted to surrender to Americans or British, not to the Soviets. The Eastern Front had been savage beyond imagination. The Germans had murdered millions of Soviet civilians. They had starved Soviet prisoners by the hundreds of thousands. The Red Army was not in a forgiving mood. Soviet captivity meant hard labor, starvation, and often death. Few SS men captured by the Soviets ever came home. Western captivity was different. The Americans and British followed the Geneva Conventions. Prisoners were fed and housed. Conditions were difficult, but survivable, and eventually, most prisoners would be released. So the Waffen SS ran west. They threw away their uniforms. They grabbed whatever civilian clothes they could find. Some put on regular Wehrmacht uniforms, hoping to pass as ordinary soldiers. They mixed with the millions of other Germans fleeing the Soviet advance. The chaos was incredible. Millions of soldiers surrendering at once, millions of refugees clogging every road, bombed cities, burned villages, no transportation, no communication, no organization. In this chaos, it was easy to disappear. When SS men reached Allied lines, they faced their first test. The Allies knew to look for the telltale tattoo under the left arm. Every SS member had this tattoo, showing their blood type. It was supposed to help medics in the field. Now it was a brand of guilt. Some SS men tried to cut out their tattoos. They used knives, razors, even burning cigarettes. The scars were obvious, but at least the lightning bolts were gone. Others claimed the marks were from wounds or accidents. Some managed to pass without being checked at all. Those who were identified as SS were separated from regular prisoners. They were held in special camps. They were interrogated. Their names were checked against lists of known war criminals. Some were sent to trial. Most simply waited. The Allies had a problem. They had millions of prisoners and limited resources. Investigating every SS member for specific crimes was impossible. They focused on the big cases, the famous names, the documented atrocities. Ordinary SS soldiers slipped through the system. By 1946 and 1947, the Allies were releasing prisoners in huge numbers. They needed to rebuild Germany. They needed workers. They could not feed and house millions of men indefinitely. Former SS members walked out of camps and back into civilian life. Some faced prosecution. The Nuremberg trials dealt with the top Nazi leadership. Subsequent trials prosecuted commanders of specific units, perpetrators of specific massacres. But these trials caught only a tiny fraction of the guilty. Most Waffen SS veterans simply went home. They found that Germany had changed. The Nazi Party was banned. The SS was dissolved. But life continued. People needed to eat, to work, to rebuild. There was little appetite for endless investigations into the past. The process of denazification was supposed to cleanse German society. Every adult had to fill out a questionnaire about their activities during the Nazi period. But the process was overwhelmed. Millions of forms. Not enough investigators. People lied. Neighbors covered for each other. The whole system became a joke. By the early 1950s, denazification was abandoned. Former Nazis, including former SS members, were free to resume their lives. Many did exactly that. They became businessmen, civil servants, teachers, doctors. They married and had children. They never spoke of the past. But some could not simply go home. Their crimes were too well documented. Their names were on lists. Their faces were known. For these men, escape was the only option. This is where the ratlines came in. Ratlines were escape routes that smuggled Nazi fugitives out of Europe. The most important ran through Austria and Italy to ports on the Mediterranean coast. From there, ships departed for South America, the Middle East, and other destinations. The routes had been used during the war to move agents and refugees. After the war, they were repurposed for escaping Nazis. Different organizations ran different ratlines, but they all worked in similar ways. A fugitive would make his way to Austria, often crossing the Alps on foot through unguarded passes. In Austria, he would contact a network that could provide shelter, false documents, and transportation. From Austria, he would travel to Italy, usually to Rome or Genoa. In Italy, he would obtain final papers and book passage on a ship. The Catholic Church played a controversial role in these escapes. Some priests and bishops actively helped Nazi fugitives. They believed they were performing acts of Christian charity saving souls regardless of past sins. They were also motivated by anti-communism, seeing former Nazis as potential allies against the Soviet threat. One key figure was Bishop Alois Hudal, an Austrian cleric in Rome who made no secret of his sympathy for National Socialism. Hudal helped dozens, perhaps hundreds, of Nazi fugitives escape through Rome. He provided shelter in church properties, helped obtain false papers, and arranged transportation. Another network was run by a Croatian priest named Krunoslav Draganović. His ratline specialized in helping Croatian fascists escape, but it also assisted German and other European war criminals. Draganović worked closely with American intelligence, which saw his network as useful for moving anti-communist agents. The International Red Cross unknowingly assisted many escapes. The Red Cross issued travel documents to displaced persons who could not obtain regular passports. Nazi fugitives used false names and forged supporting documents to obtain these papers. With a Red Cross travel document, they could move freely across borders and board ships. Where did they go? Argentina was the most popular destination. President Juan Perón had built his government on a foundation of nationalism, populism, and sympathy for European fascism. He actively welcomed former Nazis, seeing them as useful immigrants who could help modernize Argentina. Perón sent agents to Europe to recruit skilled Germans. They did not ask too many questions about wartime activities. Engineers, technicians, scientists, military officers, all were welcome. The fact that many had served the SS was overlooked. Adolf Eichmann arrived in Argentina in 1950. He was one of the main organizers of the Holocaust, responsible for the logistics of transporting millions of Jews to their deaths. He lived under a false name, working in various jobs, until Israeli agents captured him in 1960. He was tried in Jerusalem, convicted, and executed in 1962. Josef Mengele also escaped to Argentina. He was the angel of death at Auschwitz, notorious for conducting horrific medical experiments on prisoners. Mengele lived in Argentina, then Paraguay, then Brazil. He was never captured. He drowned while swimming in 1979, dying a free man. Erich Priebke participated in the massacre of 335 Italian civilians in the Ardeatine caves near Rome. He escaped to Argentina and lived there openly for decades, even giving interviews to journalists. He was finally extradited to Italy in 1995, convicted, and died under house arrest in 2013. These are just the famous cases. Thousands of lesser-known SS men also made their way to Argentina. They settled in Buenos Aires or in German-speaking communities in the countryside. They built new lives, had families, and mostly avoided detection. Other South American countries also received Nazi refugees. Brazil had a large German immigrant community that welcomed newcomers. Paraguay, under dictator Alfredo Stroessner, was particularly hospitable. Chile and Bolivia also became havens. Some SS veterans went to the Middle East. Egypt recruited German military and intelligence experts to help modernize its armed forces. Syria also welcomed former Nazis. Some converted to Islam and took Arabic names. They found new careers advising Arab governments and, in some cases, helping organize security services. Alois Brunner was one of Eichmann's top deputies, responsible for deporting over 100,000 Jews to death camps. He escaped to Syria in the 1950s and lived there until his death, reportedly in 2001 or later. He was protected by the Syrian government and never faced justice despite being one of the most wanted Nazi war criminals. Some SS veterans went to North America. Both the United States and Canada accepted German immigrants in the post-war years. Screening was imperfect. Men lied about their backgrounds. Some who had served in the Waffen SS claimed to have been forced laborers or regular army soldiers. For decades, these men lived quiet lives in American and Canadian cities. They worked in factories and offices. They joined churches and community organizations. They became citizens. Their neighbors had no idea about their past. Starting in the 1970s, investigations began to uncover some of these hidden Nazis. The United States created a special unit to find and deport war criminals. Canada conducted its own investigations. Some men were stripped of their citizenship and deported. Others died before they could be brought to justice. Some SS veterans did not run at all. They stayed in Germany and rebuilt their lives in plain sight. This was possible because of the Cold War. By the late 1940s, the United States and Soviet Union were locked in confrontation. West Germany became a crucial ally against communism. The priority shifted from punishing the past to preparing for the future. Former SS members with useful skills found themselves in demand. The new West German intelligence service, the BND, recruited heavily from former Nazi intelligence officers. Many had SS backgrounds. Their knowledge of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union was considered valuable. The police forces also absorbed former SS men. So did the courts, the bureaucracy, and the business world. Germany needed experienced people to rebuild. Questions about wartime activities were discouraged. Veterans organizations helped former SS members reintegrate. HIAG, the Mutual Aid Association of former Waffen SS members, was founded in 1951. It lobbied for recognition of SS veterans as ordinary soldiers, entitled to pensions and benefits. It worked to rehabilitate the image of the Waffen SS, separating the honorable combat soldiers from the criminal camp guards. This was propaganda, but it was effective propaganda. Many Germans wanted to believe that the Waffen SS was different from the SS that ran the death camps. The myth of the clean Waffen SS took hold and persisted for decades. What about justice? What about the victims? Some SS war criminals were caught and punished. The Nuremberg trials executed major figures. Subsequent trials convicted commanders and perpetrators of specific atrocities. West German courts eventually began prosecuting Nazi crimes, though progress was slow. But the vast majority escaped. Out of nearly 900,000 Waffen SS members, perhaps a few thousand faced any legal consequences. The rest lived out their lives in freedom. Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal dedicated their lives to tracking down fugitives. Wiesenthal, himself a Holocaust survivor, gathered information and pressured governments to act. His work led to the capture of Eichmann and others, but he was fighting against time, resources, and political indifference. The Israeli Mossad conducted dramatic operations to capture Nazi criminals. The Eichmann kidnapping in 1960 was their greatest success. But even the Mossad could not pursue everyone. Resources were limited. Priorities shifted. By the 1980s and 1990s, the surviving war criminals were old men. Some were finally prosecuted, often for crimes documented decades earlier. The trials were controversial. Critics asked whether it made sense to punish 90-year-olds for crimes committed 50 years earlier. Supporters argued that justice has no expiration date. In recent years, German prosecutors have taken a new approach. They have charged former SS members simply for serving at death camps, arguing that anyone who worked there was an accessory to murder. This has produced a final wave of trials, with defendants well into their 90s. But for most Waffen SS veterans, the end came peacefully. They died of old age, surrounded by family, their secrets intact. Their victims received no such peace. What lessons can we draw from this history? The escape of the Waffen SS shows how difficult it is to achieve justice after mass atrocity. When crimes are committed by hundreds of thousands of people, punishing them all is impossible. Choices must be made. Priorities must be set. And those choices often favor the guilty. The Cold War shows how political considerations can override moral ones. Fighting communism became more important than punishing Nazis. Former enemies became useful allies. Justice was sacrificed to strategy. The ratlines show how networks of complicity enabled escape. Priests, intelligence agencies, sympathetic governments all played roles in helping war criminals flee. Individual guilt was hidden behind institutional assistance. The myth of the clean Waffen SS shows how memory can be manipulated. Veterans organizations, sympathetic historians, and popular culture created a narrative that separated good SS soldiers from bad ones. This narrative was false, but it served the interests of those who wanted to forget. And the quiet lives of escaped Nazis show how easily evil can hide in plain sight. Men who had participated in genocide became neighbors, co-workers, fellow citizens. They lived ordinary lives while their crimes went unpunished. Nearly 1 million men served in the Waffen SS. They fought on every front. They won battles and committed atrocities. When the war ended, they faced a choice. Some faced justice. Many more ran. And most simply faded into the ordinary world, hiding extraordinary crimes behind ordinary lives. They went to Argentina and Brazil. They went to Egypt and Syria. They went to America and Canada. They went back to Germany. They went everywhere and nowhere. They disappeared. Justice caught a few. Time caught the rest. Today, the last Waffen SS veterans are dying of old age. Soon, none will remain. Their crimes will pass from living memory into history. But the victims will not be forgotten. And the question of how so many guilty men escaped will continue to haunt us. That is where the Waffen SS went after 1945. Into the shadows. Into the ordinary world. Into lives they did not deserve. Remember them. Not with respect, but with understanding. Understanding of how evil escapes. Understanding of how justice fails. Understanding of how the world moves on, even when it should not. That is the lesson of the Waffen SS. Learn it well